There is a quiet war happening inside every human mind, and most people don't even know they're losing it. You meet someone. They're warm, available, generous with their time. They call back quickly. They make space for you. And something inside you slowly begins to pull away. Not because they did anything wrong, not because they lack value, but because something ancient and wired deep into your psychology begins to whisper that anything this easy cannot possibly be worth having. This is not a romantic flaw. This is not immaturity. This is a psychological trap so deeply embedded in the human condition that it operates beneath the level of conscious thought. It runs on instinct, on ancient survival code, on a nervous system that was never designed for peace, only for the hunt. And the brutal, uncomfortable truth is this: the moment something becomes yours, a part of you begins to mourn the version of it you wanted before you had it. The want was the drug. The possession is just the withdrawal. Think about the last time you were obsessed with something you couldn't reach, a person who kept their distance, a job that rejected you once, a version of your life that felt just slightly out of your grasp. Remember the electricity of that longing? The way your mind returned to it at 2 a.m., uninvited, relentless? Psychologists call this phenomenon reactance. When freedom or access is restricted, the human brain doesn't accept the limitation quietly. It amplifies desire. It inflates the value of the restricted thing far beyond its actual worth. Not because the thing changed, but because your access to it did. The brain interprets unavailability as a signal of high value, and it does this automatically, unconsciously, without your permission. This is why the person who answers every message feels less attractive than the one who leaves you waiting. This is why the job that hired you on the spot feels less prestigious than the one that made you fight for 3 rounds of interviews. The content didn't change, the scarcity did, and scarcity rewrites the story your brain tells you about worth. Robert Cialdini documented this in The Architecture of Influence. Scarcity is not just a sales tactic. It is a primal perceptual filter through which the human mind assigns meaning to everything it encounters. We do not value things because they are good. We value things because we fear we might not be able to have them. And once we can, something dissolves, quietly, without ceremony. There was a painter in 19th century Europe who spent 15 years pursuing a woman who refused him completely. He wrote about her obsessively in his journals. He described her as the most fascinating person he had ever encountered, a force of nature, an unreachable light. She eventually agreed to marry him. Within 3 years, his journal entries about her dropped from pages of electric poetry to single, dry lines. Not because she changed, not because she became less, but because the chase was the canvas he had been painting on. She was never the muse, the longing was. This is the brutal architecture of human desire. We do not fall in love with people. We fall in love with the space between ourselves and the people we cannot fully reach. We fall in love with the imagination of them, the projected perfection of them, the uncorrupted version that exists only in the gap between who they are and how little we actually know of them. The moment someone lets you in, the projection collapses. You see the reality. And reality, no matter how beautiful, will never compete with the myth your desire built in the dark. This is not cruelty. This is how the human animal was constructed. But understanding it is how you stop being destroyed by it. The Dark Stoics understood something that modern culture refuses to admit. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the discipline of desire not as a spiritual exercise, but as a survival mechanism. Because he understood that an untrained mind does not experience the world as it is. It experiences the world as a series of things it cannot have and things it has already lost interest in. This is the trap. This is the loop. Want, pursue, acquire, lose interest, repeat. Seneca warned that most men spend their entire lives running towards something, only to discover upon arrival that the destination they imagined bears no resemblance to the one they find. Not because the world deceived them, because desire itself is a liar. It promises satisfaction at the finish line while quietly ensuring the finish line keeps moving. The Stoic prescription was radical for its time and remains radical now. To practice visualizing loss before loss occurs. To feel the full weight of impermanence while the thing is still in your hands. This wasn't pessimism. This was psychological inoculation. It was the conscious rewiring of a brain that, left to its own devices, would always mistake availability for worthlessness and restriction for gold. But here is the darker edge of this wisdom that most people are too comfortable to face. Most people do not want to be inoculated. They want the hunger. They are addicted to wanting because wanting feels like being alive in a way that having simply does not. Watch how this plays out in power dynamics, in relationships, in business, in social hierarchies. The person who withholds attention controls the emotional temperature of every room they enter. Not because they are more valuable, but because scarcity is the oldest psychological weapon ever wielded by one human being against another. The executive who is difficult to reach commands more perceived authority than the one whose door is always open. The artist who releases work sparingly creates more cultural hunger than the one who creates constantly. The lover who maintains emotional independence becomes the gravitational center of a relationship, while the one who gives freely is slowly taken for granted. This is not a lesson in how to manipulate. This is a lesson in how manipulation already works. On you, on everyone around you, in every social interaction you have ever believed was governed by genuine feeling. Because most of what humans call love, admiration, and respect is actually just the psychological byproduct of controlled access. We are, at our core, creatures who assign value based on resistance, and the world's most dangerous people know this with surgical precision.
So where does this leave the honest person? The person who gives freely, loves openly, shows up without strategy. The world will consistently undervalue them. Not because they deserve less, but because they trigger no alarm in the brain that signals, I might lose this, I must hold on. The unfair truth of human psychology is that authenticity, offered without restraint, is processed by most brains as surplus, and surplus has no urgency. This is not an argument for becoming cold. It is not a prescription for cruelty or emotional withdrawal. It is something more precise than that. It is the recognition that the untrained human mind cannot be trusted to value what it freely receives. It must be guided through contrast, through resistance, through the experience of almost losing something to feel the weight of what was always there. And this is perhaps the most brutal wisdom of all. The people who taught you your own value were often the ones who almost walked away. The moments that made you appreciate your life were the ones that nearly ended it. The love that finally felt real was the one that survived genuine doubt. We do not learn the worth of anything in the having. We learn it only in the almost losing. And most people will repeat this cycle forever, chasing the feeling of wanting, discarding the reality of having, never understanding that the prison has no walls, because the prison is the mind itself, endlessly manufacturing distance between itself and everything it already holds. You can see it now if you're willing to, the mechanism, the loop, the quiet war you've been fighting against your own psychology every time you reached for something and felt it lose its glow the moment it touched your hands. That glow was never in the thing. It was in you, in the hunger, in the dark electric space between who you are and what you have not yet allowed yourself to simply, completely